Good.
Okay.
Okay, we're up to Shlishi, page 19 in the Chayenu. In the Kahas, I don't know, you know where it is? You have it? You have the Kahas Chumash? Yeah, you can have it. I don't need this. All right. All right, so we were in the middle of the story of Yisro. Yisro, I'll talk a little bit about Yisro at the end, but the basic story is Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, he comes to the Jews. Now, there's debate of when did he come? Did he come before the giving of the Torah? Did he come after the giving of the Torah? Whatever the case is, this story of this episode we're talking about is actually not written chronologically. It's sort of just finishing the Yisro relevance, like sort of fast forwards to like the full Yisro episodes, then Yisro leaves. But this happens about 4 months later. Yisro basically was in the middle of questioning Moshe's judicial system. The basic way it was, but then Moshe primarily was the single judge to judge and teach the law and to arbitrate the law for the people. And it actually says in the notes here that Aaron and his sons and the 70 elders helped, but it wasn't it was primarily Moshe. So Moshe is like, are you crazy? You're going to wear yourself anywhere the people are. This is not sustainable. And go ask God if he agrees with my idea that you should delegate to like thousands of, lower court judges, higher court, etc. So Chaf Dalid 24, Shlishi, Vayishma Moshe l'kol chaisnoi. Moshe heeded his father's words. Vayas kol asher amar, and he did everything that he had said. Okay. 25. Vayivchar Moshe anshe chayil mikol Yisrael, and Moshe chose men of wealth from all among of Israel. Vayitin oisam roshim al ha'am, and he made them leaders over the people. Sorry alafim, sorry meyois, sorry chamishim, sorry asareis. Officers of thousands, officers of hundreds, officers of 50, group of 50 Jews, and officers of tens. And we said yesterday there was like, 60,000 of the lower judges, 12 of them of the next level up. Hundreds was what, 6,000? And then of 12,000 for the, whatever the math was, lots of judges. 26, and they indeed judge the people at every time. The difficult matter they brought to Moshe, and the minor matter they would judge by themselves, as was Yisro's plan. 26, V'shaftu, they judge v'dainin yasama. They judge the people in the past. Okay, so next, Yaviun means Maisen. Rashi, Onkelos translates it as Maisen. They were bringing. People were bringing, or the judge would bring. The smaller matters they would judge themselves, as Rashi, Yishputu means like Yishpaitu, similar tense, they would judge. As we see elsewhere, V'chein loy savuri, like the O and the U is interchangeable. K'moy loy savori. And the Targum Onkelos, he says, Doinin inun. They were judging. Mikris el yonim. The verses above, 22, the Yisro is saying, they will judge, All the when Yisro is talking, he's talking, they will judge, they will bring the big matters, the small matters, they'll bring the big matters to you, the small ones will judge himself. It's all speaking future tense. But these verses, it's saying, and they did in the past, they did, and they brought, and they so on. It's all expression of action. That's why it's past tense. Chav Zayin, by Yishalach Moshe's Chosnai, Moshe scored his father-in-law, by Yelech Lo El Artzai, and he went off to his land. Says Rashi, he went off to his land, L'gayer b'nei mishpacht. He went to convert the members of his family to Judaism. Makes a note on the bottom. As I said, this is the end of the Yisro saga. There's another place in the Torah that talks about Yisro, Moshe, that Yisro wanted to leave, and Moshe tried to dissuade him. So the difference is, if you put all the pieces of the story together, when Yisro eventually wanted to go back, he wanted to go back for personal reasons. Moshe raised objection, maybe to tend to his vineyards or whatever. Yisro changed his mind, and he didn't want to go back for the monetary things he left in Midian, but then he wanted to go back for the mission of converting his family members to Judaism.
Wow.
And that Moshe agreed and was very approving of that. So let's talk a little bit about a very short Chumash today. So bravo. So I want to talk a little bit about the story of Yisro. Seems to be, it's interesting that we're going to see tomorrow. Tomorrow's short. Today was short. Tomorrow will be longer. Tomorrow's the Ten Commandments. Wow. And Rashi commentary on it. So what's interesting is that the Ten Commandments is in a parsha called Yisro. This guy Yisro merited. If I would name this episode of the show, I would name it Moses, or 10 Commandments. It was named Yisro. We see that something about Yisro is not just incidental. Like, okay, he came, like it's kind of an incidental. Like the guy, he came and came before, and he brought Moshe's family back, and he told about the judges. But like the feature of this parsha should be the 10 Commandments. Why do we care? Why is Yisro why is he so important to the story? So, because we had a little shorter Chumash today, I'll share with you a Sicha with the Rebbe. One second. All right. So here's the deal. Yisro, we mentioned, let's piece together some Yisro stories. Yisro was the chief theologian at the time, the Stephen Hawkins or whatever, call him at the time, the big intellectual. And he says he tried, he tested every single form of pagan idolatry. Mm-hmm. We look at pagan idolatry as bowing down to like a Barbie doll, it's like ridiculous. But real idolatry is that the figurines they represent. What do they represent? What do they represent? It was a Ken doll, wasn't it? The real idolatry is that the figurine reflected a force of nature that you felt was a God-given power of nature of the world, and you would pay thanks to it in order to get more of that. So rain, you pay thanks to the rain, spiritual source of rain, sun, whatever. You saw force in the human condition. You saw money, power. So you wanted, whatever that star was, or spiritual star. So Yisro tried it all. The Zohar says, the Kabbalah says, if Yisro did not come and convert, God could not have given the Torah.
Wow.
So Yisro is a pretty big deal.
Huge.
That explains why he's sandwiched in before, after the splitting of the sea and the giving the Torah. Yisro is an important part. What was so special Yisro? He was acquainted with all the forms of idolatry, and he worshipped them. He tried them out because he was a real seeker. He was a real intellectual. He could appreciate the many different 427. So if Yisro was so smart, why didn't he realize in his own that these are all intermediaries, right? Like it was foolish to believe that the force of nature is, they're disparate forces. He was very smart. Couldn't he realize in his own that it's from God, the oneness? So the reality is like this. After the sin of the tree of knowledge, the world became constantly worse and worse.
Right.
Meaning spiritually worse. Adam, by sinning, Adam and Eve sinning, they brought in a klipa into the world that really hid God's.
We're paying for it today, right?
Well, yeah. And then Abraham, then it got worse, the people of the flood, till Avraham came along and he reversed the trend. Avraham, shown a little bit of the truth in the world. And Yitzchak more. And it's in the progression here is next is the 10 plagues. Again, is also, it wasn't just a punishment, we said many times, it was a way to educate the Egyptians and the world that God is in nature. Nature is not, Mother Nature is not in control. It's all a tool of God. And then it says the splitting of the sea was the next step on the line, the next stop on the line. But the sea, we said last week, represented that which is normally hidden, symbolized by the sea, the spirituality that's normally hidden both in our subconscious and in reality, became dry land, became open and easy to see. I mean, they actually had revelation at the splitting of the sea. It says everybody had tremendous revelation. The smallest Jew, the simplest illiterate maidservant saw more than the greatest prophet later on. So you might say, that's great. Okay, so now the world, Abraham through Moses and Moshe, and now the splitting of the sea and the plagues, we sort of, we primed the world that really God is within the world. And now we can get the Torah. But no, there was one thing needed, and that was Yisro, the great theologian of the time, the great spiritual experimenter. Because the splitting of the sea was temporary, the second the Egyptians went down and went back. So they no longer had the revelation. Rabbi Steinsaltz writes that imagine if you were one of the Israelites. You went through the Red Sea. And, nature is like, upended. And then it's back to normal the next day. Imagine the day after, what you're feeling like. You're like, I don't know, is it real? What's reality, So it didn't uproot the hold of klipa, of the, veil of impurity over the world. It wasn't lasting. It was just a temporary high. But the lasting, ability to transform, to extract good from bad in this world is by giving of the Torah. But as a precursor, Yisro, the great idolater, when he recanted the embodiment of anti-Torah philosophy, of all anti-God philosophies, and he crowned God is greater than all the other gods, he was basically saying his life experience, where he experimented with serving dirt and the clouds and the sun and ants, and whatever all possible idol worship, Barbie dolls, whatever. He worshipped every part of the human lust, every human lust for power, for fertility, whatever. He worshipped it all. And he said, it's all nothing. It's all, God is the real glue behind everything.
Amen.
He didn't just, it wasn't like he came along, he brought in all his experiences with him. And he, on a small scale, he refined all of nature by that recanting. So therefore, it is totally fitting that the last stop on the line before the giving of the Torah, when nature would be irrevocably reversed, and you will be able to get God through the Torah, through engaging with the physical stuff, by doing mitzvahs with the mundane stuff and staying away from the forbidden stuff. The last stop of the line was Yisro, the one who recanted all anti-God philosophy.
Wow.
That's as far as Yisro. But today, since we had a 5-minute Chumash, you get a bonus Dvar Torah.
Shkach.
Questions like this. Another famous Sikh of the Rebbe about Yisro. Was Yisro such a genius? Like, no one else noticed that one guy, Moshe, can judge 2 million people or 600,000, men that would come to court. Like it was, they're lining up for days. Like I mean, I don't know. It's no one else considered that this is not sustainable. And no one thought of the idea that Moshe can create lower court and higher court judges. It took Yisro, an outsider, to realize this.
Good kasha. Question.
So
Well, sometimes people miss obvious things.
that's true.
And,
Sometimes you
and,
make-
and this isn't that obvious. I mean, it's obvious when we look back on it, but looking forward, it's not always so obvious.
Well, that's a very good practical lesson that, being when you're inside the problem, it's not obvious. You're outside, so maybe it took an outsider. So that's a good lesson about
Yeah.
the famous story of a guy in a hot air balloon, and he gets lost. He gets lost in his bearings. It's very dangerous when you're lost in your bearings, the hot air balloon. And he's like 50 feet away from the ground, but he doesn't know where he is, Is he near rocks? Is he near mountains? So he sees a guy on the floor, on the ground, and he says, "Hey, sir, can you help me? I'm lost. Where am I?" So the guy looks at him, he says, "You're in a hot air balloon." He says, No. He says, "Where am I in relation to the earth?" He says, "You're 50 feet over the ground." He says, No, where? So the guy says, "One more question for you." He says, "Are you a consultant?" He says, "Yes." "How did you guess?" The guy on the ground. He says, "How do you know?" He says, "Because from the second I met you, you've told me information that is true, but totally irrelevant to my situation." Anyway, okay.
Okay.
Anyways, so here's the story of Yisro, the deeper dimension. It's very important to realize that Judaism, for years, thousands of years, we downplayed Moshe's role in everything. What does it mean we downplay Moshe's role? We downplay because, maybe because of Christianity, because they make too much big a deal about their guy. And that's why in the Haggadah, some say you don't find Moshe's name once. But Moshe is a big deal. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha kilas Yaakov. The Torah that God, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, the Torah that Moshe commanded us is the inheritance of all of Jacob. So Moshe is like really, it was very clear to everybody. Moshe is, you can't get the Torah without Moshe. One second. So here's the story. When the Torah was given, this, remember, happened after the giving of the Torah. Moshe wanted the people to hear God's word directly, even after the initial revelation. And he felt the only way to get that was through Moshe, because Moshe is the conduit to God. So Moshe assumed at that stage that he was going to lead the people into the land of Israel himself. As soon as he did so, the people would get the same consciousness that he possessed, like that high prophecy level. He therefore thought that Yisro's concerns about what would happen after his demise were unfounded, which is why he had not suggested setting up a judicial system, because he basically thought the Jews are on a much higher level. He wanted to bring them to that higher level. Yisro, he differed. He says they're not on your level, and although you can temporarily elevate them, you can spoon feed them. In the final analysis, they're not on your level. Therefore, and when they enter the land, they're going to have to earn a living, and they're not going to have the spirituality that was basic in the desert. And that will be an extra ascent into divine consciousness. Furthermore, the day will come when you'll no longer be present to elevate them. You must prepare for this eventuality. So Moshe was thinking, we're basically Mashiach's coming. I'm going to take them in, and they're all going to be elevated, and that's going to happen. But Yisro said, and that was Moshe's plan. The Jews also, no one occurred to them, like, why would you not get it through Moshe? Why would you not want to get raised to that level? It wasn't just information, it was spiritual consciousness. he consulted with God, and God approved Yisro's plan. And that's why Yisro got the extra vav, right? Yes, his name is Yeser. He got the vav because he added the section to keep sustain the Torah. All right. In other words, Yisro was right in the end. Moshe was the idealist, and Yisro was the pragmatist, and not just in a pragmatic way, that in a way, when you empower other people, you're not just, okay, you're losing maybe the way you could have done it, but in a sense, you're creating sustainability, which is great in the long run. Because we know the whole purpose in this Torah portion, we're learning the whole purpose of God in the Torah is that God gets a dwelling down here. Meaning that we don't, Moshe shouldn't just superimpose spirituality, but he should actually make society and nature part of the things needed to bring and continue teaching Torah. So Yisro had it from a sort of a world transforming view. Moshe had it, let's just bring it home view. And Yisro was ultimately right. And no one would imagine, that's why I took Yisro, because he came from this sort of transformative convert mentality, and no one else could imagine, that type of stuff. So that's one of the ideas of Yisro. All right, to finish off with Yom Yom, Mechayenu, if you want to look it up, it's on page 82 at the bottom. A quick Hasidic aphorism from the Rebbe's little book of aphorisms.
What was that word, Rebbe?
Aphorism? Saying.
Mhm.
The Rebbe Rashab once said, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, passed away in 1860 to 1920. Only a very fine line separates spiritual frigidity, actual denial of God. Wow. He was saying, this is in the, probably the 1900s, that it's better in Yiddish. Zwischen Kelt and Kfira is God adin mechitza. Basically, being cold in your Judaism is one iota away from outright, basically chucking out God in your life, denying God.
All right.
You could be a religious Jew, but you're not enthusiastic and warm to it. You can really lose it all and deny everything, because coldness is this close to being a denial of God. And he says, the verse says, God, your Lord, is a consuming fire. This says in Devarim, the fifth book of the Torah, Ki Hashem Elokecha eish eichlu. God is a consuming fire. That's the metaphor Moshe gives. Divinity is flam fire. It's a flaming fire. Learning and davening, learning and praying, Torah and praying, ought to be fired by a very fiery heart, so that all my limbs will proclaim the words of God in Torah study and prayer. It's an expression in Tehillim that all my bones should praise God. So this is the idea of why, you see me swaying a lot to people, is that you pray, you try to really make it experiential. I'm telling you, I was looking at a book.
Amen.
And this is a lot to be said about this, but the Hasidim were very, this is why it's very important that they get together and they fabreng and they say l'chaim, and there's a very experiential, real geschmack to Torah and to mitzvahs and to davening. You don't have that. Well, let's look in history. What happened in 1920s and 30s? Till today, a lot of Jews came here, and there was a disconnect from them and their kids. It was kind of, Judaism was like a yoke, and the kids like, what do I need this for? A lot of them left it.
Right.
Or as Rabbi Steinzelt says, people looked at Judaism like a hereditary disease.
Right.
When you look at it as this yoke and this load you have to carry, and it's like there's no enjoyment. You don't cultivate the enjoyment in it. Kids don't want to carry in it. So think about how this can apply. All right. Have a wonderful day.
Shkoyach.
Sequoia.